had never believed in miracles, but when I saw my name blazing in neon letters across the glass facade of the City View Tower, I realized the impossible could happen. For years, I carried my father's words like a scar across my chest. "You'll never make me proud," and they haunted my every step. Tonight, standing on the sidewalk beneath a humid spring sky, I felt detached from everything around me. The city thrummed with life, sirens in the distance and car horns like percussion. But only one flame of light mattered. Alexander Chambers, the sign read, each letter pulsating against the dark glass. I would never forget the ache in my chest when he'd spoken that sentence, dismissing my dreams with a single breath. Now I stood beneath what felt like a declaration of triumph, yet doubt not at me. Was this enough to change his heart? My palms were slick with sweat as I climbed the steel steps to the observation deck. Each heartbeat sounded like a drum roll in my ears, and below, a small crowd had gathered. Phones raced to capture the moment. I welcomed the attention and resented it all at once. Validation from strangers wouldn't matter if my father remained unmoved. I paused at the top step, grasping the cold metal railing, and closed my eyes. The warm breeze carried the scent of asphalt and lilacs from a nearby park, mingling with the salty tang of my own tears. I drew a slow breath and remembered every rejection letter I'd received, every harsh comment he'd hurled at me like stones. Then I whispered my own affirmation. "I am here. I am enough." Opening my eyes, I walked forward until the neon light bathed me in its glow. My reflection shimmered in the glass beside my name, a ghost of every doubt I'd cast aside. Behind me, the crowd's murmurs swelled into applause, but I barely registered the sound. The world felt both impossibly close and infinitely distant. I thought of my mother, who'd encouraged me when he refused to listen. She'd sent me money for art supplies, cheered my first gallery showing even as his words echoed through our small apartment, casting shadows over her hope. I wished she could be here now. Her gentle smile illuminated in my memory brighter than any neon. Memories flooded back. As a boy, I'd sketched airplanes on notebook margins, convinced that one day I'd design something extraordinary. My father, a stoic man with hands calloused from years in construction, only shook his head. "Dreams don't build stone and steel," he'd say, pointing to the half-finished house he'd been raising since I was 10. "This world demands honest work, not fairy tales." So I'd learned to keep my drawings hidden, sneaking them into a battered portfolio under my bed. And still, year after year, his disappointment grew. Each C on my report cards, each missed opportunity to join his crew, he saw them as proof that I was weak, unworthy. Yet here I was, the architect of my own destiny, having convinced the council to approve my design for the new cultural center. A sleek tower that melded glass and steel with green terraces, reflecting the city's growth and hope. When I pitched it, the room had been full of skeptics until I laid out my vision, watchful eyes softening as they followed my models and renderings. Approval had felt surreal. The mayor herself had nodded in admiration. But none of that mattered if my father still believed I'd never make him proud. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass beside the letters, willing him to see me. I wanted to shout across the distance between our worlds, to tell him I'd proven him wrong. But words caught in my throat. Instead, I closed my eyes and saw him as he was when I was small, broad-shouldered, hair flecked with gray, tired lines etched around eyes that once smiled easily. He'd worked from dawn until dusk, so we could scratch by. He'd shown love in ways he couldn't say with words. I realized then that his pride had become tangled in his fear that if I soared too high, he'd lose control of what he understood as security. Turning away from the neon glow, I stepped back and took in the view. The city stretched out in a tapestry of lights and shadows, whispering possibilities. I could almost hear his voice in the hum of traffic. "Stay grounded, Alex." But now I understood that staying grounded didn't mean staying small. I had to invite him to step into my world, to recognize that his son had grown into someone extraordinary. My success wasn't a betrayal of his values. It was the culmination of everything he'd built and taught me: the work ethic, the perseverance, the refusal to give up. I looked down at my phone, ready to call him, ready to hear his voice crack with emotion. My thumb hovered over his contact, and for a moment I hesitated. What if he refused to answer? What if his pride was too stubborn to admit he'd been wrong? A knot formed in my stomach, tighter than any fear I'd ever faced. But then I thought of the neon sign, the hundreds of eyes turned toward my name, and I realized that this was my moment. I dialed his number and pressed the phone to my ear, willing my heart to steady. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. My pulse thundered in my ears. Then, click! His voice, low and measured, came through the speaker. "Hello?" he said, almost afraid he'd imagined the call. "Dad," I whispered. "I'm up here." I heard his breath catch. "I saw the sign," he said, more softly than I'd ever heard him speak. "Alexander Chambers." He paused, and I held my breath. "You did this?" His words trembled. "I did," I said. And then, over the hum of the city below, I heard something I'd never expected to hear from him. He stopped himself, and I waited. "I'm proud of you." The neon light flickered behind me as tears blurred my vision, but for the first time in my life, I felt seen. The impossible had finally arrived. When I hung up the phone, the neon glow behind me felt less like a distant triumph and more like a beacon calling me home. My legs trembled as I descended the observation deck steps, each footfall echoing against the polished concrete. The crowd's applause faded behind me, replaced by the steady pulse of my own heartbeat. I pulled my jacket tighter against the night air, though it was warm and humid, as if I needed protection from the vulnerability rising inside me. My mind raced through every moment of my life with my father, wondering if tonight's fragile breakthrough could withstand the weight of years of silence. Under the yellowish streetlights, the city looked familiar and strange all at once, a map of streets I had walked 1,000 times but never truly seen until now. When everything had changed, I decided to take the long way back to my apartment. Weaving through narrow side streets where small cafes and shuttered storefronts stood in semi-darkness, the scent of freshly baked bread drifted from an all-night bakery, and I imagined my father there, standing behind the counter, kneading dough with the same rough, capable hands that had built our old house. I smiled at the thought, remembering how he would bring home warm rolls on Sunday mornings, the aroma filling our cramped kitchen. Those small gestures had been his way of showing love when words failed him. Maybe tonight I'd rediscover that language, to the unspoken kindness that had always connected us, even when his pride kept us apart. Reaching the subway station, I swiped my card and boarded the train, sliding into a window seat as it rattled into motion. The neon sign's colors still danced behind my eyelids every time I closed them, but now they carried hope instead of doubt. I traced patterns on the condensation forming on the window, watching as tunnel walls blurred into darkness, then gave way to the dim glow of distant platforms. Each station name flashed by: Riverside, Elm Street, Central Park West. I wondered which stop would feel like the moment I truly bridged the gap between my past and my future. I pictured my father stepping onto the platform beside me, his wary expression softening as he met my gaze. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. A message from my mother. "Congratulations, baby. I knew you could do it." Her words felt like a warm hand on my shoulder, steadying me. I typed back a quick thank you, then hesitated before pressing send. Part of me wanted her to share in this victory, but another part worried that her unconditional support might diminish the fragile moment between my father and me. I slid the phone back into my pocket and focused on the rumble of the tracks beneath me. The train emerged into the light of a quiet station, and I rose, stepping onto the platform as the doors hissed closed behind me. I walked the remaining blocks to my old neighborhood, where rows of brick houses lined narrow sidewalks. The streetlights cast long shadows across manicured lawns, and I paused before the house where I'd grown up. The paint was peeling on the front steps, and the garden my mother once tended was overgrown with weeds. I stared at the familiar facade, feeling both drawn to and fearful of what awaited me inside. Memories flooded back, my father's booming laughter as he tossed me into the air, my mother's soft humming as she cooked dinner, the sound of rain tapping against the skylight in the attic where I used to draw for hours. I realized that the house had been more than a building. It was the crucible of my dreams and the source of my father's doubts. Summoning my courage, I raised my fist and knocked on the front door. Footsteps shuffled inside, and the bolt slid back with a metallic click. The door swung inward to reveal my father's broad shoulders silhouetted against the warm hallway light. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer and his posture a little more stooped. His eyes widened when he saw me standing there, framed by the night. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other, two worlds colliding in a doorway. Then he stepped back, straightening his shoulders, and wordlessly motioned for me to come in. I crossed the threshold, the familiar scent of old wood and spices wrapping around me like a faded photograph coming to life. Inside, the living room was cluttered with the artifacts of his life tools, framed certificates from trade school, a faded photograph of him in his 20s standing beside his first truck. He closed the door behind me and turned, folding his arms as though bracing himself. I felt the weight of his silence pressing against my chest. Finally, I spoke, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Dad, I'm proud of you too." His expression softened, confusion and relief warring in his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it again as if searching for the right words. The ticking of the old clock on the mantel filled the space between us. At last, he exhaled, his shoulders slumping, as if releasing a lifetime of tension. "Come with me," he said. He led me down the hall to the kitchen, where a single lamp cast a pool of light over the formica table. He pulled out a chair for me and sat across the table, hands folded. I watched him as the seconds stretched on, waiting for him to speak. Then he leaned forward and placed his hand over mine, the rough skin of his palm a testament to decades of labor. "I saw your name up there," he said, voice thick. "I never imagined I'd see it, and I never imagined I'd be saying this. But I'm proud of you, Alex." I felt tears well up, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I squeezed his hand and smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me that no neon sign could match. Outside, the city hummed on, oblivious to this quiet reconciliation. I realized at this moment this second part of my journey was about more than pride. It was about understanding, forgiveness, and the fragile beauty of a father's love finally shining through the years of doubt. When dawn broke over the city, I blinked awake to shafts of pale light slicing through the slatted blinds. My head felt heavy, weighted by last night's revelations and the faint scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. I slipped out of bed and followed that aroma downstairs, where my father stood at the counter stirring a pot, steam curling around his broad shoulders. He looked up as I entered, and for a moment I saw in his eyes the same boyhood awe I once felt watching him build walls and roofs with nothing but raw materials and determination. He set 2 mugs on the table, strong, black coffee just the way I liked it, and gestured for me to sit. The clink of mugs and the hiss of the percolator felt like an unspoken apology woven into morning rituals. I took a tentative sip, feeling the warmth spread through me, washing away the last stains of doubt. My father leaned forward, elbows on the formica tabletop, his gaze steady. He spoke quietly, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace we had built in the darkness. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "about what you said about dreams and building something extraordinary. I was wrong to dismiss you." He paused to swallow, and I watched the color rise in his cheek. I realize now that courage isn't measured by how heavy your tool belt is, but by how you carry your vision. His words struck me like a hammer against steel. Genuine, unyielding. I forced a smile and reached for his hand, fingertips brushing rough skin that had once felt like armor. "Thanks, Dad," I managed, voice thick. The moment stretched between us, dense with unspoken truths and the promise of new beginnings. Outside, the city's hum rose, a distant symphony of horns and sirens and early morning commuters reminding me that life moved forward, whether we were ready or not. I lifted my mug and proposed a toast. To fresh starts, he clinked, his mug against mine, and I felt the echo of his pride deepen inside me, rooting me in the present. After breakfast, Dad surprised me by pulling out a set of blueprints from a worn folder. I recognized the pencil sketches immediately, rough designs for a family workshop he'd dreamed of building before I was born. He'd abandoned the idea when my mother got sick and the bills piled up. "I want you to help me finish this," he said, pushing the papers across the table. I looked down at the drawings, a sturdy brick structure with wide windows, workbenches lining the walls, and a sloping roof to catch rainwater. My heart soared. Here was a bridge between our worlds, his craftsmanship and my creative vision. I traced a finger along the lines of a wall, imagining how glass panels could bathe the interior in natural light. "We could make it a joint studio," I suggested, voice trembling with excitement. "Your tools, my designs, everyone could come here to learn, to build, to dream." My father studied me with an intensity I'd never seen. Then he leaned back and ran a hand through his graying hair. "You've always been the dreamer, Alex. Maybe it's time I learned a thing or two from you." Relief and joy washed over me in equal measure. We stayed in that kitchen, hunched over blueprints and coffee cups, sketching and arguing and laughing, until the sun climbed high overhead. In the weeks that followed, we transformed the half-forgotten corner of my mother's garden into a construction site. Neighbors paused on the sidewalk to watch the old man and his son heft bricks and mix mortar, exchanging nods and smiles of encouragement. I found myself explaining architectural principles to curious onlookers: load-bearing walls, cantilevers, thermal insulation, while Dad demonstrated how to wield a trowel and level a foundation. Our roles shifted and blended, the boundary between father and son dissolving in the shared rhythm of work. Each brick we laid felt like a word in a new conversation. Each beam we raised a gesture of forgiveness and understanding. By the time the workshop's walls stood tall and the roof took shape, our project had become more than a building. It was a testament to the power of second chances. Late one afternoon, as we installed the final window pane, Dad paused to wipe sweat from his brow. He looked at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears, and said, "You know, I was afraid I'd lose you to some world I couldn't understand. But working with you here, I see that your success doesn't separate us. It brings us together." I laid down my trowel and stepped close, wrapping an arm around his broad back. I felt him lean into me, a lifetime of unspoken love pouring out. In that silent embrace, when the workshop was finished, we held an open day for friends and family. The building gleamed in the late afternoon light, its glass walls reflecting the sky like a promise of what lay ahead. Inside, benches and tools stood ready for new creators to make their mark. My name still glowed atop City View Tower downtown. But here near my childhood home, it was Dad's rough-hewn signature on the cornerstone that mattered most. As people mingled and admired our handiwork, I caught my father's eye and raised a mug of lemonade in salute. He returned the gesture, pride shining in his gaze brighter than any neon. That evening, as we locked up and turned off the lights, we walked the perimeter of the workshop in companionable silence. The air was cool, and fireflies flickered above the garden where my mother had once planted roses. I stopped beside a young oak we'd planted together in her memory, the tree's slender trunk reaching toward the sky. My father rested a hand on its smooth bark and said, "You planted this with her." I never realized how strong the roots of hope could be. I smiled and laid my hand atop his, feeling the pulse of life beneath our fingers. In that moment, I understood that pride isn't a trophy to be displayed. It's a quiet warmth that grows in shared effort and mutual respect. My journey from the neon-lit tower back to this humble workshop had come full circle. I had stood beneath my name in lights, but I had found something far more endearing working side by side with my father. As we turned to head inside, I felt a surge of gratitude for the man who molded my values, for the mother who nurtured my dreams, and for the city that bore witness to both my triumphs and my reunions. The impossible had happened once when my name flickered across the skyline, but the true miracle was here in this garden, in this workshop, in the love we rebuilt together.